My daughter-in-law did not know that the company she had been spending from for 3 years was never hers to touch. My name is Walter Graves, and this is the story of how I gave everything to my son, watched a stranger dismantle it piece by piece, and then took it all back in a single afternoon. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, the way things actually happened, because the ending only makes sense if you understand what came before it. I built Graves Construction with my own hands, not metaphorically, literally. In 1987, I was 31 years old, driving a second-hand truck with a cracked windshield, doing drywall repairs and small renovation jobs for anyone who would hire me. My wife, Patricia, was working double shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide, so we could make rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in Dayton, Ohio. We did not have a safety net. We did not have family money. What we had was Patricia's discipline and my stubbornness, and somehow that was enough. By the time my son Daniel was born, we had our first real contract, a small office renovation in downtown Dayton. By the time Daniel started school, we had 6 employees and a warehouse. By the time he graduated high school, Graves Construction was a mid-sized commercial contractor with 43 employees, a reputation for finishing on time, and more work than we could handle. I was proud of what we had built, not the money, the thing itself, the work, the people, the mornings I drove to job sites before sunrise and watched something go up where nothing had been before. Patricia died when Daniel was 26. Breast cancer. She fought it for 2 years, and she fought it hard, and when she was gone, I did not know what to do with myself except work. So I worked. And I told myself that everything I was building for Daniel. That was the story I kept telling myself for a long time. Daniel was a decent young man in his 20s. Curious, a little unfocused, but warm. He had his mother's eyes and her habit of laughing at his own jokes before he finished telling them. When he was 28, he brought home a woman named Renee. She was sharp, well-dressed, and she had a way of filling a room that I initially mistook for confidence. I liked her at first. I want to be honest about that. I was not suspicious. I was just a father glad to see his son happy. They married the following year. I paid for the wedding. I did not mind. I gave them the down payment on their house in Columbus. I did not mind that either. When Daniel came to me at 30 and said he wanted to join the company, I was genuinely glad. I made him VP of Business Development, gave him a salary that was more than fair, and I started thinking seriously about stepping back. I was 62. My knees hurt in the mornings. I had been working for 30 years without a real vacation. The idea of handing Graves Construction to my son felt like the right shape for the end of my story. What I did not understand yet was that Renee had a different story in mind. It started small, the way these things always do. Renee began attending meetings she had not been invited to. She started CCing herself on emails between Daniel and our CFO. She had opinions about vendor contracts that she expressed loudly and often, despite having no background in construction, no role in the company, and no legal standing to be involved at all. When I mentioned this to Daniel, he smiled and said she was just enthusiastic. She was trying to learn the business. I let it go. Then she started spending. The corporate card that had always been used for job site expenses and client dinners began showing charges I did not recognize. A spa in Scottsdale. Furniture for their home billed as office equipment. A trip to Miami for what the receipt described as a client meeting, but which our actual client confirmed never happened. $12,000 over 4 months. Then $18,000. Then, in a single billing cycle the following spring, $31,000. I brought the statements to Daniel directly. I sat across from him at the kitchen table in his house, the house I had helped him buy, and I laid the papers out in front of him and I asked him to explain. He looked at the numbers for a long moment. Then he looked at me. He said, "Dad, you're not running this company forever. Renee is going to be part of this eventually. You need to stop treating her like an outsider." I told him she was not on payroll. I told him she had no title, no authority, and no business putting personal expenses on a corporate account. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and he said, "You know what your problem is? You never trusted anyone, not even Mom. You always had to control everything." I did not say anything for a moment. I let that sit in the air between us. Then he said, "This company is going to be mine someday, So technically, you're the one spending our money. Maybe think about that. I drove home that night, and I sat in my kitchen for 2 hours without turning on the lights. I thought about Patricia. I thought about the cracked windshield on that truck in 1987. I thought about every Saturday I had missed when Daniel was young because there was a job that needed finishing. I thought about whether Daniel was right, whether I had been controlling, whether I had failed somewhere as a father that had led to this moment in this kitchen with my son looking at me like I was the problem. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I told myself it was growing pains. I told myself Renee was still adjusting. I called our CFO and quietly asked her to flag any unusual charges, but I did not take the card away. I did not say anything more to Daniel. I kept the peace. That was my mistake. Over the next 8 months, Renee's involvement in the company escalated in ways I had not anticipated. She began introducing herself to our subcontractors as the future CEO. She told one of our longest-serving project managers, a man named Ed who had been with Graves Construction for 19 years, that once she and Daniel took over, he should expect significant changes to his role. Ed came to me quietly, hat in hand, and told me he was thinking about taking a job with a competitor. I told him not to go anywhere. I told him I would handle it. I went to Daniel again. This time he was less measured. "She's trying to help," he said. "You're threatened by her. You've been threatened by her since the beginning." She told Ed Kowalski he might not have a job. Ed Kowalski has been coasting for years. Renee sees things clearly because she's not emotionally attached to everyone the way you are. She has no role in this company. Daniel. He stood up. He was taller than me by 2 inches, and he used it in that moment, drawing himself up the way he used to when he was 15 and trying to win arguments he had no right to win. "You need to start treating this transition seriously," he said. "Make it official. Sign over majority shares. Let us actually run things. Because right now you're just dangling the carrot and then snatching it back and everyone can see it, Dad. It's embarrassing." I left without responding. That evening I called my attorney, a man named Frank DeLuca, who had handled Graves Construction's legal affairs for 20 years. I told him I wanted to review the shareholder agreement. He asked if something was wrong. I told him I was just being careful. He said that sounded like something was wrong. I also, for the first time, hired a forensic accountant, a woman named Sandra Chu, who came recommended by my bank's commercial lending officer. I asked her to go back through 2 years of company financials and flag everything that looked irregular. I did not tell Daniel. I did not tell anyone at the company. I just waited. Sandra called me 6 weeks later. She asked if I had time to meet in person. The number she put on the table was $247,000. That was the amount she had traced to personal expenses charged directly or indirectly to Graves Construction accounts. Some of it was through the corporate card. Some of it was through vendor accounts where Renee had apparently contacted suppliers directly and had items billed to the company. A bathroom renovation at their Columbus home. Jewelry. 2 international flights listed as business travel with no corresponding client activity. A lease on a storage unit that contained, according to a brief inquiry Sandra had made, furniture and personal belongings. $247,000. And alongside this, Sandra had found something else. Daniel, using his VP credentials, had quietly begun transferring small amounts, never more than $8,000 at a time, the threshold below which certain bank flags are not triggered into a personal LLC he had formed 6 months earlier. The LLC had a name that meant nothing, GRD Consulting. It was not affiliated with Graves Construction in any document. It existed only to receive money that should have stayed in the company. I sat with that information for 4 days. I did not call Daniel. I did not change my behavior at work. I came in at my usual time, had my usual coffee, walked the floor the way I always had. I said good morning to Ed Kowalski and asked about his daughter's soccer team. I reviewed bids. I signed off on a subcontractor agreement. I was completely normal. On the 5th day, I called Frank DeLuca and told him everything Sandra had found. Frank was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Walter, I need you to understand what your options are and what each of them costs you." I told him I understood. He said, "You can confront Daniel privately and demand repayment and restructure the agreement. That keeps it in the family and keeps it quiet. Or you can pursue this legally, which means involving law enforcement, which means your son potentially faces criminal charges, which means this becomes public, which means Graves Construction is in the news for something other than building things. I asked him which he recommended. He said, "I can't make that call for you. This is your son." I drove to Columbus the following Saturday morning. I arrived at Daniel and Renee's house at 9 o'clock. Renee answered the door in a silk robe and looked at me with an expression that told me she already knew something was coming, though I could not have said how. Daniel came downstairs a few minutes later. We sat in the living room with the furniture I had indirectly paid for, in the house with the bathroom renovation I had unknowingly funded, and I placed Sandra's report on the coffee table and I slid it toward him. He looked at it. He looked at me. He did not touch it. "Before you say anything," he said, "you need to understand that this company was always going to be mine. Everything you built for me. That's what you always said. So what exactly is the problem here?" I told him the problem was that he had taken money that was not his to take without my knowledge or consent. I told him that regardless of what the future held for the company, he did not have the right to treat it as a personal account. I told him I wanted the money repaid, and I wanted Renee removed from any involvement in company operations, formally and immediately. Renee, who had been standing in the doorway, said, "You're jealous. That's all this is. You're an old man who can't let go." I did not look at her. I kept looking at my son. Daniel said, "We're not paying anything back. You're going to retire, you're going to sign over the shares like you always said you would, and you're going to stop pretending you have leverage here, because you don't. I've been running that company for 2 years. The clients know me. The staff knows me. You walk away, nothing changes. You stay and make trouble, everything falls apart. So think carefully about what you want here, Dad." He said "Dad" the way someone says a word they no longer believe in. I picked up Sandra's report. I stood up. I told him I would think carefully. Then I went home and I called Frank DeLuca. What came next took 11 weeks to arrange. Frank was meticulous and I was patient. We contacted the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation quietly, through a referral from Frank's colleague in commercial litigation. Sandra Chu's report, combined with bank records subpoenaed through the civil discovery process Frank had initiated, was thorough enough that the investigators were interested from the first conversation. At the same time, Frank helped me exercise something I had always retained in the shareholder agreement, a clause that allowed the founding shareholder, meaning me, to rescind delegation of corporate authority to any officer in the event of documented financial misconduct. Daniel's VP role had never included actual share transfer. I had always been careful about that. I had meant it as protection for him, so he would have a real role before taking on real ownership. In the end, it protected something else. We also retained an independent HR firm to conduct a formal workplace review, which gave Ed Kowalski and 2 other employees the opportunity to document the interactions they'd had with Renee in a protected setting. What came out of those sessions was more detailed than I had expected. On a Tuesday in March, while Daniel was at a job site meeting he had scheduled himself, a process server arrived at the Graves Construction offices, with documents formally removing him from his VP position, pending a civil proceeding. His access credentials were deactivated at 11:14 in the morning. The corporate card was canceled. The GRD Consulting LLC was named in a civil complaint filed that same day in Franklin County. 2 investigators from the BCI visited Daniel and Renee's home that afternoon. I was not there for any of it. I was at a job site in Dayton, walking the foundation of a new community health clinic we were breaking ground on that week. It was cold and the mud was thick, and one of the younger site managers was explaining the drainage plan, and I listened carefully and asked questions, and when my phone buzzed, I looked at it and saw Frank's name, and I excused myself and walked to the edge of the site. Frank told me the documents had been served. He told me Daniel had called him directly, twice, and that he had declined to speak with him as he was not Daniel's attorney. I thanked Frank. I stood there at the edge of that job site with mud on my boots and cold air off the river, and I felt something I had been afraid I would not feel, which was nothing dramatic, not triumph, not grief, just a kind of settling, like a structure finding its level after the ground has shifted. I did call Daniel that evening. He answered on the second ring. He did not say hello. He said, "How could you do this?" I told him I had not done anything to him. I told him he had done something to me, and to the company, and to people who had worked with me for decades and trusted that things were what they appeared to be. I told him I was sorry it had come to this. I meant that. I was genuinely sorry. He said some things after that which I will not repeat. They were things said in anger and fear, and I understood the fear even if I could not excuse the rest of it. When he was quiet, I told him one more thing. I told him that I had updated my estate plan 6 weeks earlier with Frank's help, and that I had also made a phone call to my nephew, my late brother's son, a young man named Thomas, who had grown up watching me work and had spent 3 summers in high school on my job sites, and had gone on to study civil engineering and was currently managing infrastructure projects for a firm in Cincinnati. I told Daniel I had offered Thomas the opportunity to join Graves Construction as COO with a path to majority ownership. Thomas had accepted. Daniel said, "You're giving my company to someone else." I said, "I built that company. It was never yours until I gave it to you. I have not given it to you." He hung up. The civil proceeding settled 8 months later. The settlement required repayment of the full $247,000, drawn in part from equity in the Columbus house, which was sold. The criminal investigation resulted in a deferred prosecution agreement for Daniel on charges related to the unauthorized transfers, contingent on full repayment, and 3 years of supervised financial oversight. Renee was not charged criminally but was named in the civil complaint and bore joint liability for a portion of the settlement. I will tell you what I did not expect, which was how much it hurt regardless. There is no version of that outcome that does not involve your son selling his house. There is no version where you feel entirely righteous. I lay awake more nights than I care to count that year, running back through 20, 30 years of decisions, looking for the place where I had gone wrong, the moment I had missed something that might have changed the way it ended. I do not know that I found it. I think the honest answer is that I gave Daniel everything except the experience of earning it, and I do not know if there was a way to do one without sacrificing the other. Patricia might have known. She was wiser than me in the ways that mattered most. Thomas joined Graves Construction the following January. He is 34 years old, and he works the way I worked at 34, which is to say he works too hard and cares too much and argues with me when he thinks I am wrong, which is more often than I expected, and more often than I admit. Ed Kowalski is still with us. He brought his daughter to the company Christmas party last year, and she is 16 now and taller than her father, and she beat everyone at the trivia game we set up in the break room. I still come in most mornings. My knees still hurt. I park close to the door now, which I resisted for longer than I should have, because there is something in me that has always associated parking close to the door with giving up, and I have not given up. I have adjusted, which is different. Daniel and I have spoken 4 times since the settlement. The conversations are short and careful, like walking across ice you are not sure will hold. I do not know what we are building toward, or whether we are building toward anything at all. I keep the door open because he is my son, and because Patricia loved him, and because I believe, on most days, that people are capable of more than their worst moments. I told him that once, in one of our short, careful conversations. I told him I believed that. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I know, Dad, that is what I am holding on to." Those 3 words, in that order, in his voice, on a Tuesday afternoon in November with the winter light coming flat through my office window and the sound of a job site somewhere below, the particular sound of things being built. That is enough for now. That has to be enough.